I'm Beatrice, a 71-year-old retired nurse from Florida. My son called, his voice frantic, demanding I pour the entire $200,000 my late husband left me into what he called a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He thought I was just some slow old woman who knows nothing about money, and he expected me to blindly obey. But what he didn't know is that this old woman is part of a retirement investment club. And it took us exactly 5 minutes to see the truth. The company was a worthless shell, and my own son was running a scam to steal every last penny from his own mother. He thought he had me walking right into his perfectly laid trap, but he was dead wrong. We didn't buy a single share. Instead, we used our own money to bet on his failure, turning his con into our payday. He wanted to build an empire with my money. Now, I'm going to burn it all to the ground myself. The scent of hibiscus and salt water always made me think of Arthur. He'd planted those bushes himself the year we moved into this little slice of Florida heaven, the year after I retired from nursing. A place to grow old, Bee, he'd said, his hands covered in soil. No more snow, no more stress, just you, me, and the sunshine. We only got 10 years of that sunshine together before his heart gave out. That was 5 years ago. Now the sunshine felt different, still warm but lonelier. His pension and life insurance were the nest egg. Not a fortune, but enough. Enough for me to live comfortably in our small, paid-off home, to keep the hibiscus trimmed, and to never have to worry about choosing between medication and groceries. It was Arthur's last gift to me, a fortress of security he'd built with a lifetime of hard work. And I guarded it like a dragon guards its gold. The phone rang, its shrill cry cutting through the quiet afternoon hum of the ceiling fan. I knew who it was before I even looked at the caller ID. Only one person called with that kind of urgency in their digital ring. David, I said, picking up. Is everything all right? Better than all right, Mom. Everything's fantastic. His voice was a buzz of electric energy, the way it always got when he was closing a deal. My son, the Wall Street shark, swimming in a sea so different from my placid Florida pond. Listen, I don't have a lot of time, but I had to call you. Something huge has come up, a real game changer. I sat down at my small kitchen table, my hand instinctively tightening around the receiver. I loved my son, loved him more than words could say, but that tone in his voice always put my nursing instincts on high alert. It was the sound of a fever, a manic energy that wasn't entirely healthy. What is it, sweetie? I asked, keeping my voice even. It's a company, Mom, a biotech firm, Innovix Pharma. They're on the verge of a breakthrough with a new Alzheimer's drug. Phase 3 trials are looking incredible. The stock is still flying under the radar, trading for pennies. But when the news breaks, and it's going to break any day now, this thing is going to the moon. He paused for a breath, the words tumbling out of him. I'm talking 10, 20, maybe 50 times our investment. This is the one, Mom, the one we've been waiting for, our investment. He always said our when he wanted my money. I looked out the window at Arthur's hibiscus bushes. David, you know I don't play the market. Arthur and I, we always believed in slow and steady. CDs, a few conservative mutual funds. Mom, please, he cut in, a new edge of frustration in his voice. CDs are for grandmas. You're not just a grandma. This isn't gambling, it's a sure thing. I have inside information, well, not inside, but I'm close to it. My sources are rock solid. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to turn Dad's legacy into a real dynasty. Imagine it. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing for the rest of your life. We could travel, buy a place on the water. This is for us, Mom. There it was, the emotional hook baited with his father's memory. It was his go-to move, and it stung every time. How much are you talking about, David? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Everything, he said, the word landing like a stone in the quiet kitchen. The whole nest egg, we have to go all in to maximize the return. 100, 200,000, whatever you've got. We move it all into Innovix. I've already set up the trade. I just need your verbal confirmation to execute. My blood ran cold. Everything. The money that paid for the roof over my head. The money that was supposed to last me another 20 years. The fortress Arthur had built for me. My son was asking for the keys to the gate. David, that's everything I have, I said, the words feeling foolish and small. I know, he exclaimed, misinterpreting my fear for excitement. That's why it's so perfect. It's a clean slate. Mom, Dad would have wanted this. He wasn't a man who played it safe his whole life. He took a chance on you, didn't he? He laughed, a short, sharp bark that held no real humor. I closed my eyes. Let me think about it, David. I need some time. There is no time. He snapped, the polished Wall Street veneer cracking. The news could drop any minute. We need to move by market close tomorrow. Don't you trust me? I'm your son, I'm doing this for you, for our family. I'll call you back tomorrow, David, I said, my voice firmer now, before the market closes. I hung up before he could argue further, my hand trembling. The silence of the house rushed back in, but it was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating. He had no idea what he was asking. Or maybe, and this thought was far more terrifying, he knew exactly. I picked up my purse, my hands moving with a purpose that belied the turmoil in my chest. I walked out the front door and got into my 7-year-old Buick. I wasn't going to the bank. I wasn't going to call a financial advisor. I was going to a meeting. The Whisperwind Court Community Center was a modest building with beige stucco walls and an overly enthusiastic air conditioner. Inside, 3 of my dearest friends were already seated around a card table, not with a deck of cards, but with laptops and steaming mugs of coffee. This was the weekly meeting of the Banyan Tree Investors Club, though among ourselves we had a different name, the Wolf Pack of Whisperwind Court. Eleanor Vance, a retired history professor with a mind like a steel trap, looked up over her reading glasses as I walked in. Beatrice, you look like you've seen a ghost. George Tanaka, a gentle soul who'd spent 40 years as an aerospace engineer, pushed a fresh mug of coffee toward my usual seat. Bad news. Maria Rossi, who had run a successful Italian restaurant with an iron fist and a heart of gold for 50 years, just watched me, her dark eyes missing nothing. It's your son, isn't it? She said. It wasn't a question. I sank into my chair and let out a long, shaky breath. He wants it all, I said, and then I told them everything. The company name, Innovix Pharma, the sure thing. The pressure to invest my entire nest egg by tomorrow. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the AC. Eleanor was the first to speak, her voice calm and dangerously quiet. He used Arthur's memory against you. That's a low blow, even for a stockbroker. A biotech on the verge of an Alzheimer's breakthrough? George murmured, already typing furiously on his laptop. That's the oldest carrot in the book. They dangle that cure in front of investors every few years. It creates a massive hype bubble, and when the trials inevitably fail or get delayed, the bubble pops. The early guys get out with millions. The little guys, the ones who buy at the top, they get wiped out. He said he had sources, I whispered, feeling a desperate need to defend my son, even now. Of course he did, Maria snorted, stirring her coffee with a clatter. Everyone on Wall Street has sources. It's code for a rumor I heard from a guy who knows a guy. What he's asking you to do, B, it's not investing. It's lighting a match to your life savings. George's screen was now filled with charts and graphs that looked like a mountain range of green and red peaks. Okay, here's Innovix Pharma, he said, turning the laptop for us to see. Ticker symbol INVX, trading at 75 cents a share. Volume is low, but look at this. He pointed to a flurry of recent activity. There's been a surge in buying over the last 2 weeks from a few specific hedge funds. Small purchases, trying to stay off the radar. Someone is definitely trying to build a position before something happens. Or before they make something happen, Eleanor corrected him. A pump and dump. It's a classic scheme. They buy up a cheap, worthless stock, create a massive hype campaign with fake news and insider tips to drive the price up, and then they sell all their shares at the peak, leaving everyone else holding the bag when the price crashes back to zero. The words hung in the air, cold and ugly. A pump and dump, my own son. He wouldn't do that to me, I said, but the conviction in my voice was gone. The feverish energy I'd heard on the phone, the desperation, the emotional manipulation. It all started to click into place. Honey, Maria said, reaching across the table to put her warm hand on mine, he's in a world that eats people alive. Sometimes they forget who they are. They see numbers on a screen, not their mother's future. I looked at their faces, these friends who had become my family. Eleanor, the strategist, George, the analyst, Maria, the gut check. We had started this club 5 years ago after Arthur died. I was adrift and they anchored me. We wanted to learn how to protect our own small fortunes, to be self-reliant, to never be at the mercy of a fast-talking young man in a suit who saw us as easy marks. We studied, we'd learned, we'd made small, smart investments. We grown our modest savings by a respectable 12% year over year. We were not gamblers, we were hunters, we were the wolf pack. Leaner leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with an intensity I hadn't seen since we'd exposed the fraudulent roofer who was preying on the widows in our community. He thinks you're a sheep, B, she said softly. He's leading you to the slaughterhouse. I think it's time we showed him what happens when you corner a wolf. George swiveled his laptop back around. Their financials are a mess. They're burning through cash with no viable product in the pipeline for at least 5 years, according to their own SEC filings. The Alzheimer's drug is a Hail Mary, and from the preliminary data, it looks more like a placebo. He looked directly at me. This stock isn't going to the moon, B, it's going to the morgue. A cold resolve began to form in my heart, displacing the fear and the hurt. David didn't see me. He saw a bank account. He saw a stepping stone for his own ambition. He had picked the wrong little old lady to fool. What do we do? I asked, my voice steady now. Eleanor smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of her lips. He wants you to buy, but the real money, the smart money, is made when a stock like this collapses. We can't just buy puts, George said, thinking out loud. Options are too risky and the premiums will be high if there's already hype building. But if we know it's going to fail, we short it, I finished his sentence, the words tasting like ice and iron on my tongue. Short selling. Betting against a company. Borrowing shares to sell them, hoping to buy them back at a much lower price and pocketing the difference. It was a predator's move, a wolf's move. We can pool our funds, Eleanor said, her mind already racing. It would be a significant position, enough to make a real impact, and a real profit. And while we're at it, Maria added, her eyes glinting, a certain anonymous tip to the Securities and Exchange Commission might be in order. They take a very dim view of brokers who use their mothers to pump up a worthless stock. I looked at the faces around the table. They weren't just offering financial advice. They were offering to go to war for me. The hurt inside me was still a raw, gaping wound, but something else was growing alongside it. A cold, clear anger. Arthur had built me a fortress to keep me safe. My son was trying to tear it down from the inside. He thought I was alone in there. He was wrong. The whole pack was inside with me. All right, I said, my voice clear and strong. George, figure out the best way to structure the short. Eleanor, you draft the letter to the SEC. Maria, you help me practice my lines. I have a phone call to make tomorrow, just before the market closes. My eyes met theirs, one by one. He wants a game changer. Let's give him one. The next morning, the Florida sun streamed through my blinds with its usual cheerful indifference. It didn't know that my world had tilted on its axis. I made coffee, my hands moving through the familiar motions, but my mind was a world away, replaying David's voice. This is for us, Mom. The words were meant to sound like a promise, but now they felt like a threat. A deep, aching sadness settled in my chest, a grief for the son I thought I knew. It was one thing to be betrayed. It was another to be betrayed by your own child. By 9 a.m., the wolf pack had assembled in my living room. The card table was gone, replaced by what George proudly called our war room. His laptop was hooked up to my television screen, displaying the Innovix stock chart in stark green and red. Maria had brought a thermos of coffee so strong it could dissolve steel, and a plate of her famous biscotti, which no one had touched. Eleanor was pacing in front of the hibiscus window, a yellow legal pad in her hand. Okay, let's review the battle plan, Eleanor said, stopping her pacing to tap the pad with her pen. Phase 1 is containment and reconnaissance. B, your job is the hardest. You have to keep David on the hook. You have to be the loving, slightly dotty mother who is overwhelmed but ultimately trusts her brilliant son. Can you do it? I took a deep breath, the coffee Maria had poured for me warming my hands. I was a nurse for 40 years. I learned to smile at a patient 5 minutes after one had died in my arms. I can handle David. Good, she said with a firm nod. George, what's our financial position? George adjusted his glasses, all business. I've been on the phone with my broker since the pre-market opened. Between the four of us, we can put together a short position of about $300,000. It's a significant risk. If we're wrong, if this drug is somehow legitimate and the stock flies, our losses are substantial. It's not legitimate, Maria said, her voice flat. I feel it in my bones. This stinks worse than 3-day-old fish. The boy is desperate. You could hear it in his voice, B said. Desperate people do stupid things, not brilliant things. Maria's gut is a surprisingly reliable financial indicator, Eleanor noted dryly. But I prefer data. My research last night turned up something interesting. The CEO of Innovix, a Dr. Alastair Finch, has a history. 2 of his previous biotech startups went bankrupt under very similar circumstances. A lot of hype, a big stock run-up, followed by a catastrophic trial failure and a timely executive sell-off just before the crash. He's a professional bubble blower. That clinches it, George said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Okay, I'm setting up the trade. I'll borrow the shares through a series of smaller transactions to avoid flagging any algorithms. We'll be in position by noon. The moment David thinks your wire has cleared, our bet against him will be live. The thought of it made my stomach churn. We were betting against my son. but then I remembered his voice, dripping with condescension. CDs are for grandmas. He wasn't just trying to take my money, he was trying to take my dignity, to paint me as a clueless old woman he could easily manipulate. "Eleanor, the tip," I asked, turning to her. She held up the legal pad. "Drafted and ready to be sent from a secure, anonymous email address I will set up at the public library this afternoon. It's detailed. It names David Thomas and his firm, Sterling Gecko. It mentions the specific stock, INVX. It suggests they are targeting retirement accounts belonging to family members. It's enough to get their attention to put him on a watch list. They won't act immediately, but it lays the groundwork. When the stock collapses, our tip will look prophetic." "Good," I said, a knot of tension in my shoulders loosening just a fraction. "So all that's left is me." Maria came and sat beside me on the sofa. "All right, B, let's rehearse. What are you going to say when you call him?" "I'll just tell him I'm in," I said. No, Maria scolded gently. "Too easy. He'll be suspicious. You were hesitant yesterday. You have to give him a story. You have to sound like you've been won over. You have to play the part he expects you to play." She took my hands in hers. "Think about it. He sees you as sweet, a little naive, maybe a bit lonely. Use that. Tell him you couldn't sleep. Tell him you prayed on it. Tell him you talked to a picture of Arthur and felt it was the right thing to do. Give him the performance of your life, cara mia." We spent the next hour role-playing the conversation. Maria played David, perfectly mimicking his slick, impatient tone. George and Eleanor threw in suggestions. "Ask him if it's tax-free." "That's a classic rookie question." "Tell him you're worried your friends at the community center will think you're being reckless." With every line we rehearsed, something inside me shifted. The pain was still there, but the feeling of being a victim was fading, replaced by the cold, sharp focus of a predator. I wasn't just playing a part. I was setting a trap. At 2:30 p.m., with George giving me a thumbs up that our short position was fully established, I picked up the phone. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I took one last look at my friends who were watching me with breathless intensity. I drew strength from their presence, closed my eyes, and dialed. He picked up on the first ring. "Mom, you're cutting it close. Tell me you have good news." I let out a shaky sigh, a little acting trick Maria had taught me. "Oh, David, I'm sorry to call so late. I've been a wreck all day." "Mom, I don't have time for." "I'm doing it," I said, cutting him off. There was a split second of stunned silence on the other end. You are, the whole thing?" "Yes, the whole thing," I said, letting my voice crack just a little. "I was up all night just thinking. I sat with a picture of your father and I asked him what he would do. And you were right, David. He was a brave man. He wouldn't want his legacy sitting in some dusty old bank account earning nothing. He'd want it to be working for his family. For you." I could almost hear the triumphant grin spreading across his face. "Mom, that's amazing. I knew you'd see it. You won't regret this, I promise you." His voice was dripping with false sincerity. "Oh, I hope not," I said, playing the part of the worried mother. "My friends at the club, they'd have my head if they knew. They're all so cautious." "Forget them," he said dismissively. "They don't understand how real wealth is built. This is Major League, Mom. You're in the game now." He was practically purring. "Okay, I've already emailed you the wire instructions for my firm's clearing account. Just forward that to your bank. You need to tell them to expedite it. I need the funds to clear before 4 p.m. so I can make the buy." "Okay, honey, an email," I said, pretending to be flustered by the technology. "I'll look for it." "Oh, David, are you sure this is safe?" "Mom, it's safer than crossing the street," he said, his voice oozing a patronizing confidence that made my blood boil. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it. I'll handle everything. You just send the money and think about what color yacht you want." "A yacht? Oh my," I laughed weakly. "I just want to be sure you're taken care of, sweetie." "And you will be. We all will be," he said quickly. "Gotta go, Mom. Things are crazy here. Kyle is waving at me about another big trade. Just send the wire. I'll call you tonight when it's done. You're the best, Mom." And then he was gone. The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone back into its cradle. The living room was completely silent. My 3 friends were staring at me, their faces a mixture of awe and concern. "Bravo," Eleanor whispered, breaking the silence. "Meryl Streep has nothing on you." George let out a long, slow whistle. He bought every word of it. "The wire is a brilliant touch. It gives us a paper trail of his instructions." I just nodded, feeling numb. The performance had drained me. I had lied to my son, skillfully and without hesitation. I had looked into the abyss of his greed and hadn't flinched. The sadness was still there, a heavy anchor in my soul, but the fear was gone. In its place was a hard, cold certainty. I walked over to the mantelpiece and picked up the silver-framed photo of Arthur and me on our wedding day. He was so young, so full of life, his eyes sparkling with love and promise. I thought about the fortress he had built for me and how close I had come to handing the keys to a fox. "I'm protecting it, Arthur," I whispered to the photo. "I'm protecting us." Outside, the Florida sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It looked like a celebration. But in our war room, we all knew the truth. The first shot had just been fired, and the real battle was yet to come. The days that followed were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Our lives at Whisperwind Court continued on the surface with their placid, predictable rhythm. Water aerobics on Tuesday, book club on Wednesday, potluck on Friday. But beneath it all, our war room was buzzing. George had set up alerts on his phone that chimed every time INVX made a move. Eleanor was discreetly pumping her network of retired professionals for any whispers about Sterling Gecko, David's firm. And Maria, bless her heart, kept us all fed and grounded, reminding us to breathe when the tension became unbearable. My role was to be the willing, slightly anxious lamb. David called me every evening, his voice a heady cocktail of excitement and greed. The wire transfer, of course, never happened. My excuse was a comedy of errors I knew he'd find believable for a 71-year-old woman. First, I couldn't find the email. Then, I didn't understand the bank's online portal. Finally, I went to the bank in person, only to be told by a very unhelpful young man that a transfer of that size required a manager's approval, and the manager was out with the flu. "Mom, you're killing me," David groaned during our third call, the frustration fraying the edges of his voice. "The stock is already up to 90 cents. We've missed out on 20% gains already." "Oh, I'm so sorry, sweetie," I'd cooed, twisting the phone cord around my finger. Maria, sitting across from me, gave me an encouraging wink. "This new technology is just so confusing. I'll go back first thing in the morning, I promise." It was a delicate dance, feeding his belief in my incompetence while keeping his hope alive. We needed him to believe the big payday was coming. The longer he believed, the more committed he and his firm would be to their position, and the more other unsuspecting investors they would likely pull in. Meanwhile, George's charts told the real story. The stock was indeed inching upward, but on dangerously low volume. "It's a textbook manipulation," he explained, pointing to the screen. "See these little spikes? That's them. David's firm and their cronies are trading small blocks of shares back and forth between themselves to create the illusion of activity and upward momentum. They're painting the tape, trying to attract the attention of day traders and algorithms." "They're chumming the water," Eleanor said grimly, looking up from a file she was reading. Speaking of which, I spoke to my cousin's husband, the one who used to be a compliance officer at Merrill Lynch. The name Sterling Gecko rang a bell. The founder, a man named Kyle Preston, has a reputation. He's slick, aggressive, and specializes in high-risk microcap stocks. He's been investigated twice by the SEC, but nothing ever stuck. He's a pro at covering his tracks. Kyle. That was the name David had mentioned. Kyle is waving at me about another big trade. My son wasn't just swimming with sharks, he was in the tank with the alpha. A new character had entered our drama, and he felt more dangerous than David. David was my son, blinded by ambition. This Kyle Preston sounded like a predator by nature. A week into our charade, something shifted. David called, and the manic energy was gone, replaced by a strained, almost brittle cheerfulness. "Great news, Mom," he said, a little too loudly. "The wire transfer doesn't matter anymore. Kyle, my boss, he's so confident in this play that he's offered to front you the money. He's going to purchase $200,000 worth of INVX shares on your behalf in a company account. He says he considers you family." The room went cold. I looked at my friends, my eyes wide with alarm. This was a move we hadn't anticipated. What?" I stammered, genuinely thrown off balance. "I know, isn't it incredible? He's a great guy. He sees my potential. He sees our potential." "So you're in, we're in. The shares are bought and paid for. We'll just settle up the accounts once the stock sells." I told him how you were having trouble with the bank, and he just smiled and said, "Let's not let bureaucracy get in the way of a brilliant opportunity." He was lying. I could hear it. Kyle Preston wasn't being generous. He was escalating. He was taking control of the narrative. He was probably tired of waiting for the capital from his broker's clueless mother and decided to force the issue, creating a fake position to keep David motivated. I looked to Eleanor for guidance. She scribbled on her legal pad and held it up for me to see, agree, be grateful. He is trapping himself. I took a shaky breath. "Oh, David, I don't know what to say. That's so generous of him. Please thank him for me." "I will," David said, smug and triumphant. I told you this was a sure thing. Now all we have to do is wait. The PR blast about the Alzheimer's drug is scheduled for next Wednesday. Once that hits the news wires, it's liftoff. He had just given us the final piece of the puzzle, the date, the catalyst for the dump that would follow the pump. Next Wednesday. We had 6 days. After the call, the atmosphere in the war room was grim. He's in deeper than we thought, George said, staring at the screen. This Kyle character isn't just his boss. He's his handler. David is a pawn, and he's probably using David's story about his mother's retirement fund to lure in other, bigger fish. So when the stock crashes, Kyle will have a scapegoat. Eleanor finished, her voice laced with ice. The brilliant young broker who got emotional and convinced his own mother to go all in on a bad tip. It's dirty. It protects Preston and leaves David holding the bag. A wave of nausea washed over me. They were going to sacrifice my son. My foolish, greedy, ambitious son was going to be the fall guy. The anger I felt was suddenly dwarfed by a fierce, primal surge of maternal protection. He had betrayed me, yes. He deserved to be taught a lesson, a hard one, but he did not deserve to be destroyed by a man like Kyle Preston. We have to get him out, I said, my voice quiet but firm. My friends looked at me in disbelief. B, what are you talking about? Maria asked gently. He's the one who put you in this position. I know what he did, I said, my gaze unwavering. But he is still my son. We can't let this Preston character feed him to the wolves. There has to be a way to punish him without ruining his entire life. To separate him from Kyle before the SEC comes knocking. That's a very dangerous line to walk, Beatrice, Eleanor warned. You're trying to control a demolition. You could get caught in the blast. I don't care, I said. I brought him into this world. I'm not going to stand by and watch Kyle Preston take him out of it. What do we know about this Kyle? George turned back to his laptop. 42 years old, lives in a penthouse in Tribeca, drives a McLaren, divorced twice, known for his extravagant parties and a taste for high-stakes poker. Poker, Maria mused, a slow smile spreading across her face. Now that's a language I understand. A man who likes to gamble like that, he has an ego, and a man with an ego can be bluffed. A new plan began to form, far more audacious and far more dangerous than our first. The goal was no longer just to win money or to teach David a lesson. The goal was to save him from himself and from the shark he'd chosen as a mentor. David mentioned a big company event, I recalled. A gala or something for their top investors. It's this Saturday before the Wednesday announcement. Eleanor's eyes lit up. A perfect opportunity. An uninvited guest can cause quite a stir. What are you thinking? George asked, looking nervous. I'm thinking, I said, standing up and walking to the window, watching a hummingbird dart among the hibiscus flowers, that it's time this little old lady from Florida paid a visit to the big city. David wanted me to be in the game. Fine, I'm coming to the casino. The wolf pack of Whisperwind Court was going to Wall Street, and we weren't just going to short the stock. We were going to short the man. We were going to bluff Kyle Preston, and the pot was my son's future. The flight to New York was a surreal experience. The last time I'd been on a plane was with Arthur, for a trip to the Grand Canyon. Now, here I was, squeezed into a middle seat between George, who was nervously reviewing stock charts on his tablet, and Eleanor, who was studying the floor plan of the Elysian Grand Ballroom, where the Sterling Gecko Gala was being held. Maria sat across the aisle, charming the flight attendant into giving us extra biscotti. To any casual observer, we were just 4 retirees on a holiday. In reality, we were a strike team heading into enemy territory. We checked into a modest hotel in Midtown, a few blocks from the glittering towers where fortunes were made and lost in the blink of an eye. The city was a sensory overload, the roar of traffic, the sea of anonymous faces, the sheer, overwhelming scale of it all. It was David's world, and I felt like a foreigner in my son's life. Our plan was bold and hinged on a series of calculated risks. George had used his engineering precision to craft a new persona for me, Beatrice Vance, a wealthy, eccentric widow from Palm Beach, a distant cousin of Eleanor's. He had even created a convincing, if superficial, digital footprint for her, including a placeholder website for a fake family foundation. My costume was a tasteful but expensive-looking silk dress Maria had insisted on buying for me, a string of her mother's pearls, and an air of quiet authority we'd rehearsed for hours. Eleanor was my sharp-witted financial advisor. George and Maria were my old money friends, along for the ride. The target was Kyle Preston. Our objective was to get his attention, pique his interest, and plant a seed of doubt about Innovix Pharma, the very stock he was pumping. We wouldn't approach him as adversaries, but as potential, very large-scale investors who were just a little too shrewd for our own good. Saturday evening arrived with a cold, drizzling rain that made the city lights shimmer and blur. As our taxi pulled up to the Elysian Grand, I felt a tremor of stage fright. Uniformed valets hurried to open doors for men in sharp tuxedos and women in glittering gowns. We were 4 sparrows about to walk into a den of peacocks. "Showtime," Maria whispered, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. Eleanor handled the door. As we expected, our names were not on the list. She feigned aristocratic indignation, a performance worthy of Dame Judi Dench. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice dripping with ice. "I am Eleanor Vance, and this is my cousin Beatrice. We are guests of Mr. Preston." The young woman at the check-in desk was flustered. "I'm so sorry, ma'am, but I don't have you down." "Perhaps," Eleanor said, leaning in conspiratorially, "he wished for our arrival to be discreet. We are here to discuss a rather substantial private placement. I'm sure if you just let him know the Palm Beach Vances have arrived, he will clear this up immediately." The combination of her tone, the mention of money, and the name drop worked like a charm. A moment later, a sleek-looking man in a suit appeared. He introduced himself as Kyle Preston's assistant. A quick whispered conversation, and we were in. The doors swung open to a cavern of sound and light. A jazz trio was playing, waiters circulated with trays of champagne, and the air buzzed with the self-congratulatory hum of the very rich. And then I saw him. David. He was standing in a small circle of men, laughing, a glass of champagne in his hand. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, but tired. There were dark circles under his eyes I hadn't noticed over the phone. He looked like he belonged here, and yet he looked completely lost. Our eyes met across the room. For a split second, his smile faltered. Confusion, then shock, then a wave of panic washed over his face. He immediately excused himself and started making a beeline for us. This was the first test. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he stammered, his voice a harsh whisper as he pulled me aside, behind a large potted palm. "You can't be here." I adopted the persona of Beatrice Vance, slightly confused and out of her element. "Oh, David, darling, Eleanor insisted we come. She's been talking to some people about your firm, and we were in the city anyway, so we thought we'd stop by and say hello. What a lovely party." His eyes darted nervously around the room. "Mom, this is a private event. You need to leave. Now, before Kyle sees you." "Kyle? Oh, the gentleman who was so generous." "I was hoping to thank him in person," I said with an innocent smile. Before David could protest further, a smooth, confident voice cut in from behind him. "Is there a problem here, Thomas?" We all turned. Standing there was a man who practically radiated predatory charisma. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with silvering temples and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He had a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was Kyle Preston. David paled. "Mr. Preston, no sir, no problem at all." "This is just my mother, Beatrice, and her friends. They were just leaving." Preston's cold eyes swept over our group, lingering on my pearls and Eleanor's severe, intelligent face. He dismissed George and Maria with a glance. He was a man who assessed net worth the way a butcher assesses a side of beef. "Leaving so soon?" Preston said, his smile widening slightly. "I don't think so. Any mother of my star protege is a guest of honor." He extended a hand to me. "Kyle Preston. It's a pleasure to finally meet the woman who raised this financial wizard." I took his hand, my own feeling small and fragile in his firm grip. "The pleasure is all mine, Mr. Preston. David has told me so much about your generosity." "Please," he said, his eyes still fixed on me, "call me Kyle. And I hope he also told you about the brilliant opportunity we're all about to capitalize on." "Ah, yes. Innovix," Eleanor interjected smoothly, stepping forward. "My cousin was just telling me about it. It sounds almost too good to be true." "Eleanor Vance," she said, shaking his hand. Preston's eyes narrowed slightly. He wasn't used to being challenged, however politely. "In our business, Mrs. Vance, too good to be true is another name for a payday. David, why don't you get your mother and her friend some champagne?" He turned his full attention to Eleanor and me, dismissing my son like an errand boy. David scurried off, looking utterly miserable. "You mentioned Palm Beach," Kyle said to me, his voice a low purr. "I have a place in Manalapan. We must be neighbors." "We spend most of our time on the philanthropic circuit," Eleanor said before I had to lie. "Beatrice's late husband, Arthur Vance, left behind a rather significant foundation. We're always looking for new avenues for impactful investment." The bait was laid. The words significant foundation and impactful investment were catnip to a man like Preston. "Is that so?" he said, his interest clearly piqued. "Well, you've come to the right place. Sterling Gecko is all about impact." He gestured around the glittering ballroom. But tonight is for celebration. Let's talk business later. For now, enjoy the party." He gave us another one of his empty smiles and glided away, swallowed up by a crowd of admirers. The first phase was a success. We were in. We had the alpha wolf's attention. But as I watched my son return with a tray of champagne, his hand trembling slightly, I knew the most dangerous part of the game was about to begin. We had to convince Kyle Preston we were players, while simultaneously convincing David we were just his embarrassing, out-of-place family. And we had to do it before our deception, or the stock, came crashing down around us. The next hour was a blur of forced smiles and polite conversation. Kyle Preston was a master puppeteer, constantly circling us, introducing us to other investors with a casual air that belied his sharp, calculating purpose. "Beatrice and Alina Vance," he'd say. "They run a major family foundation out of Palm Beach, thinking of making a significant play with us." Each introduction was a test, a way for him to gauge our reactions and see if we belonged in his world. Alina was magnificent. She spoke the language of finance with a fluency that was both intimidating and alluring. She dropped names of obscure funds and referenced arcane tax laws, building a fortress of credibility around us. George and Maria played their parts as wealthy eccentrics perfectly, he by talking passionately about orbital mechanics to a bewildered hedge fund manager, she by critiquing the canapés with the authority of a 3-star Michelin chef. I stayed mostly silent, playing the role of the quiet, dignified matriarch who held the purse strings. I would nod, smile gently, and occasionally ask a simple, disarming question. "But is it a socially responsible investment, Mr. Preston? My late husband was very particular about that." This seemed to fascinate Kyle. He saw me as the final gatekeeper, the emotional heart of the money he so desperately wanted to manage. David, meanwhile, was a ghost at the feast. He hovered at the edge of our circle, his face a mask of anxiety. He was trapped. He couldn't expose us without revealing his own deception to Kyle, but he was clearly terrified of what we might say or do. At one point, he managed to pull me away toward the balcony. "Mom, what is going on?" he hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "A family foundation? Palm Beach, what is this?" "We just wanted to see your world, sweetie," I said, my voice full of practiced innocence. "And Alina has some friends who might be interested in investing. She's just networking." "You're going to ruin everything," he whispered desperately. "Kyle is not someone you play games with. He's the real deal. If he thinks you're wasting his time, why would he think that?" I asked, looking him straight in the eye. "Unless, of course, the opportunity you told me about isn't quite as brilliant as you said." He flinched, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. He opened his mouth to respond, but just then Kyle's voice boomed from the stage. "Friends, colleagues, fellow masters of the universe," he began, a spotlight illuminating him. The room fell silent. "I want to thank you all for coming. We stand tonight on the precipice of a new era of prosperity, not just for our firm, but for all of you who have placed your trust in our vision." He launched into a slick, rousing speech about innovation, disruption, and the paradigm-shifting power of Sterling Gecko. It was a masterfully empty performance, full of buzzwords and promises, and then he came to the main event. "And the vessel for that prosperity," he declared, his voice dropping to a dramatic hush, "is a little company called Innovix Pharma. Next week, they will announce to the world that they have done what science has dreamed of for a century. They have found a viable treatment for Alzheimer's." A wave of excited murmurs rippled through the crowd. Kyle let the moment hang in the air before continuing. "This isn't just about making money, it's about changing the world, and as a pre-launch celebration, I have a surprise for my team." He paused for effect. "Tomorrow morning, a chartered jet will take all Sterling Gecko employees and their partners to a private retreat in the Bahamas for the weekend. A reward for your hard work before the real work begins on Monday." The room erupted in applause. David, standing beside me, looked stunned and then elated. A weekend in the Bahamas. He was truly in the inner circle. This was our opening. As the applause died down, Alina signaled to me it was time for phase 2. While Kyle was basking in the adoration of his acolytes, Alina and I made our way to the ballroom's exit, making sure to walk right past him. "Leaving so soon, ladies?" he asked, intercepting us with a practiced smile. "Regrettably," Alina said, her tone cool and professional. "We have an early flight. It was an illuminating evening." "Illuminating how?" he asked, his curiosity piqued by her deliberate choice of words. "Well," Alina said, glancing around as if to ensure no one was listening, "the enthusiasm is certainly infectious. But Beatrice and I, we have a fiduciary duty to our foundation, and a few things about Innovix don't quite add up for us. Kyle's smile tightened. I assure you, Mrs. Vance, all our data is solid. Oh, I'm sure it is, Alina said smoothly. But I was just on the phone with a colleague of mine on the board of a Swiss pharmaceutical giant. It's funny, they're also in phase 3 trials for an Alzheimer's drug, a much larger, better-funded trial. And my colleague seems to think they are the ones on the verge of a breakthrough. In fact, he seemed quite surprised to hear a small firm like Innovix was even in the running. It was a complete fabrication, a masterful lie spun from thin air. George had spent the afternoon researching Innovix's competitors, and we'd chosen the largest, most reputable one as our phantom champion. Kyle's composure didn't crack, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Doubt. There's room for more than one player in a market this big, he said dismissively. Of course, Alina agreed. But it does make one wonder about market share and about which company will get FDA fast-track approval first. My colleague also mentioned something about a novel protein inhibitor. Innovix's drug is a simple amyloid plaque cleaner, isn't it? A much older, less effective approach, he said. A bit dated. Every word was a carefully placed drop of poison. We weren't accusing him of fraud. We were just introducing a more appealing alternative, making his sure thing sound like a second-rate bet. We were attacking his ego, questioning his status as the man with the best information. Your colleague is misinformed, Kyle said, his voice a little too sharp. Perhaps, I said softly, speaking for the first time. It was my turn. But our foundation has $5 million it needs to place by the end of the quarter. We can't afford to back the second-best horse, no matter how exciting the race. I gave him a gentle, apologetic smile. Thank you for the champagne, Kyle. It was lovely. David, sweetie, you have fun in the Bahamas. And with that, we turned and walked away, leaving him standing there amidst the celebration, the seed of our bluff planted firmly in his mind. Back in the taxi, the four of us were silent for a long moment, the adrenaline slowly beginning to recede. $5 million, George finally whispered, breaking the silence. B, you were incredible. Did you see his face when Alina mentioned the novel protein inhibitor? Maria chuckled. He looked like he'd swallowed a bad clam. Alina, however, was pensive. The bluff is on the table, she said. Now we wait to see if he calls it. A man like that, the first thing he's going to do when he gets home tonight is try to verify my story. He's going to search for the Vance Family Foundation. He's going to look up news on Innovix's competitors. And he'll find George's placeholder website and the real news about the Swiss company's progress, I said. It's not proof of anything, but it's enough to make him nervous. The real test would be what he did next. A confident man would dismiss us as amateurs. A greedy, insecure man, and we were betting Kyle Preston was the latter, would become paranoid. He would start to wonder if someone else had a better inside track than he did. He might even decide to protect his own capital and get out of the Innovix position before his own investors did. There's just one problem, George said, his voice grave. David. He's on a plane to the Bahamas tomorrow with that monster. He's completely cut off. Whatever Kyle decides to do, David will be the last to know. The thought sent a chill down my spine. We had wanted to separate David from Kyle, but we had just left him stranded on an island with him, completely at his mercy. Our bluff hadn't just put Kyle's money in jeopardy, it had put my son in very real danger. Sunday in New York was gray and oppressive. The drizzle had turned into a steady, cold rain. From our hotel room window, the city looked like a cage of wet steel. We spent the day huddled in our own war room, monitoring the financial news wires and online chatter. There was nothing. The silence from Kyle Preston's camp was absolute. No news is not necessarily good news, George muttered, endlessly refreshing a stock forum on his laptop. It could mean he dismissed us and is proceeding as planned. Or it could mean he's moving quietly, preparing to pull the rug. He's a poker player, remember? Maria said, pouring another round of coffee. He's not going to show his hand. He's sitting there, stone-faced, deciding what to do. My guess, he's furious. We questioned his intelligence in front of his flock. My own anxiety was a tight, physical knot in my stomach. I couldn't stop picturing David on a white sand beach, oblivious, drinking a cocktail while a viper coiled at his feet. I tried calling his cell phone several times, but it went straight to voicemail. He was out of reach, just as George had predicted. On Monday morning, the game changed. George, who had been watching the pre-market trading since dawn, suddenly sat bolt upright. We've got movement, he said, his voice tense. A huge block of INVX shares just went up for sale. Anonymous seller rooted through a dark pool to hide the trade. It's him. It has to be. We all crowded around the laptop. A massive red candle was forming on the chart as the market opened. The price, which had closed at over $1 on Friday, was now plummeting. 90 cents, 85, 70. He's dumping his shares, Eleanor breathed, her eyes wide. Our bluff worked. He got spooked. He's decided to take his profits and run before the Wednesday announcement, leaving everyone else to hold the bag. Including David, I whispered, my blood running cold. As the price crashed, our short position, our bet against the stock, was suddenly generating a massive profit. The numbers on George's screen were climbing at a dizzying rate. $100,000, 200, 3. It was a fortune being made from the ruins of Kyle Preston's scheme. But I felt no joy. All I could think about was the phone call my son was inevitably going to get when he landed back in New York. The call came late that afternoon. The caller ID was a blocked number. When I answered, it wasn't David. It was the cold, venomous voice of Kyle Preston. "You," he hissed, the single word dripping with fury. "The little old lady from Florida, you and your clever friends, the Vance Family Foundation doesn't exist. I had my people check. You played me." I held the phone, my knuckles white. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Preston." "Don't you?" he sneered. "You cost me millions, but that's just business. What you did to your son, however, that's personal." He just landed. He's been trying to call me, hysterical. He seems to think the company still has a position in Innovix. He seems to think he's about to be a very rich man. My heart stopped. "What did you do?" "I did what any good manager does. I protected my firm's capital. I sold our entire position this morning. As for the shares I bought for you, that was just a little motivational tool for your boy. A fiction. He owns nothing. Less than nothing, in fact. Because the story I'm going to tell the SEC and anyone else who asks is that one of my junior brokers went rogue. Got a bad tip, got emotional, and made a series of unauthorized trades using a shadow account linked to his own mother. He's the perfect scapegoat. It's so beautifully tragic. The cruelty of it took my breath away. "You can't," I whispered. "I already have," he said. "The wheels are in motion. Your son's career on Wall Street is over. And depending on how badly he panics, he could be facing jail time. You wanted to play in the big leagues, Beatrice. Well, this is what it looks like when you lose. You should have stayed in Florida." The line went dead. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. My friends were looking at me, their faces etched with horror. I had tried to save my son, and instead I had handed Kyle Preston the perfect weapon to destroy him. Then my other phone, my cell phone, began to ring. It was David. I answered, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "David?" "Mom," he sobbed, his voice broken and utterly defeated. "Mom, what happened? The stock, it's worthless. Kyle won't take my calls. They've locked me out of my accounts. They're saying I did it. They're blaming me for everything. Mom, I'm ruined." I listened to his desperate, rambling confession. How Kyle had pressured him, how the promise of a huge bonus was tied to bringing in new capital, how he had become so desperate to prove himself that he'd been willing to risk everything, including my life savings. He wasn't a monster. He was a scared, ambitious kid who had gotten in way over his head. "David, listen to me," I said, my own voice surprisingly calm and clear. The fog of panic was lifting, replaced by the cold, sharp focus of a nurse in an emergency room. "Where are you?" I'm at my apartment. The doorman just called. He said there are 2 men in suits in the lobby asking for me. He thinks they're federal agents. "Okay," I said, my mind racing. Eleanor was already scribbling on her pad again. "Do not talk to them. Do not let them in. Lock your door and stay quiet. We're coming to get you." My friends and I said. "We're in New York. We're on our way." Hanging up the phone, I looked at the wolf pack. The game had just become terrifyingly real. Our profits were meaningless. The only thing that mattered now was the wreckage of my son's life. "Eleanor," I said, my voice steely, "the anonymous tip you sent to the SEC, it named David, didn't it?" "Yes," she said grimly, "along with Kyle Preston and Sterling Gecko. Then we have to undo it. We have to give them a bigger fish to fry. We need to give them Kyle." "How?" George asked, his face pale. "It's your son's word against his. Preston will have a dozen lawyers to bury him in paperwork." "He'll have more than David's word," I said, a desperate plan forming in my mind. "He'll have his own. Maria, you said a man with an ego can be bluffed. I think it's time for one last hand." Our new mission was clear. We had to get to David, get him out of his apartment without being arrested, and then we had to orchestrate a confrontation that would give the SEC what it really wanted, not a junior broker, but the kingpin himself. "George, call a car service. A discreet one. Tell them to meet us at the service entrance in the back of David's building in 20 minutes, I commanded. "Eleanor, you're a history professor. You know how to find leverage points. I need everything you can find on Kyle Preston's personal life, his investments, his ex-wives. Anything that smells like a weakness. Maria, you and I were going to get my son. We moved with a swift, silent purpose. The grief and fear were still there, but now they were fuel. We had started this to protect a nest egg, but it had become a fight for a life. As we rode the elevator down, I caught my reflection in the polished brass doors. I didn't see a frightened old woman. I saw a mother. And there is no creature on earth more dangerous than a mother protecting her child. The ride to David's luxury apartment building was the longest 10 minutes of my life. The city lights smeared past the rain-slicked windows, a world of glittering indifference. George sat in the front seat, calmly giving directions to our driver, a stoic man who asked no questions. In the back, Maria held my hand, her grip as firm and steady as an anchor. Eleanor was on her phone, her face illuminated by the screen's glow, reading everything she could find. We pulled up to the service entrance in a dark alley behind the building. "Wait here," I told the driver. "We'll be back." Maria and I slipped out into the rain. Inside, the back hallway smelled of disinfectant and discarded takeout. We took the service elevator up, my heart pounding in time with the rattling of the lift. When we reached his floor, I could see two shadows at the far end of the main corridor, the silhouettes of the federal agents. We were just in time. I knocked softly on his door. "David, it's Mom. I'm with Maria. Open the door." We heard a series of clicks as he unfastened the locks. The door opened a crack, and his terrified face appeared. He was a wreck. His suit was rumpled, his tie was gone, and his eyes were red-rimmed and wild with panic. He pulled us inside and shut the door, leaning against it as if to hold the world at bay. "They're still out there," he whispered, his body trembling. "I know, honey," I said, putting my arms around him. He collapsed against me, all his Wall Street swagger gone, and for the first time in years, he felt like my little boy again. "It's going to be okay. We're going to fix this." "How?" He sobbed into my shoulder. "He has everything. The accounts, the records, he set me up perfectly." "Because you were the perfect person to set up," Maria said, her voice not unkind but brutally honest. "You were so eager to please him, so hungry for his world, you made it easy. Now you have a choice. You can sit here and fall apart, or you can get angry, and you can help us nail that son of a bitch to the wall." David looked up, his face streaked with tears. He saw the resolve in our eyes, and something in him shifted. The panic began to recede, replaced by a flicker of the fight he'd inherited from me. "What do I have to do?" We smuggled him out the same way we came in, a baseball cap pulled low over his face. The drive back to the hotel was silent, the weight of our next move settling over us. Back in our suite, the war room was in full operation. George had already set up a high-fidelity microphone, small enough to be hidden in a flower arrangement. Eleanor looked up from her laptop. "I have our leverage," she said, her voice tight with excitement. Kyle Preston's second divorce was famously messy. His ex-wife accused him of hiding assets in offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands to avoid a fair settlement. The case was settled out of court, but the accusations were never formally withdrawn. If the SEC were to get a tip that he's still using those same accounts to hide profits from schemes like Innovix, it would give them a much bigger reason to investigate him personally. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. I took a deep breath. "Okay, it's time to make the call." I was the one who dialed. Kyle picked up on the second ring, his voice laced with smug triumph. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Calling to beg for your son's future." "No, Kyle," I said, my voice as calm and cool as a winter morning. Eleanor held up a cue card, business, not personal. "I'm calling to make a deal. My friends and I were very impressed with your decisiveness. You're a man who knows how to cut his losses and protect his capital. That's a man we can do business with." There was a stunned silence on the other end. "What are you talking about?" "The $5 million from our foundation," I said smoothly. "The offer is still on the table. In fact, we'd like to increase it to 10, but not for a public stock. We want in on your next private venture. The kind of deal that doesn't show up on any public filings. The kind of deal you manage through your more discreet accounts. The Caymans, for instance." Another silence, this one longer, heavier. I could feel his mind working, the gears of greed grinding against the wheels of suspicion. He was arrogant. He thought he had already beaten us. He couldn't resist the chance to take our money for real this time. "My hotel suite," he said finally. 1 hour. The next hour was the most intense of my life. George secured the microphone. Eleanor briefed us, drilling me and David on our roles. David had to be broken, remorseful, completely under my thumb. I was to be the cold matriarch, disappointed in my son's failure but determined to invest with a real winner. When Kyle Preston walked into our suite, he was the picture of a conquering hero. He barely glanced at David, who was sitting hunched on the sofa. "So," Kyle said, turning to me, "you're willing to throw your own son under the bus to make a profit. I knew I liked you." "David made a mistake," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "He was emotional, reckless, a bad investment. You, on the other hand, are a good investment. But before we wire $10 million to an account in the Caribbean, we need an assurance. We need to know exactly how you insulated yourself from a failure like my son, so we know our money is safe with you." It was the perfect bait, an invitation for him to brag, and he took it. For the next 15 minutes, Kyle laid out the entire scheme with chilling pride. He explained how he used David to pump the stock, how he created the fake position in my name to keep him motivated, how he dumped his own shares while David was in the air, and how his pre-planned narrative of the rogue junior broker was now being fed to the SEC. "It's a work of art," he finished, a smirk on his face. "The kid never knew what hit him, but that's the price of admission to this world." And then, Alina spoke from the armchair in the corner, where she had been sitting in silence. "And that's the price you'll pay for it, Mr. Preston. Thank you for your confession. It's been most illuminating." She held up her phone, which was connected to a small, professional-looking recorder on the table. A small red light was blinking. Kyle Preston's face went from smug to confused to ashen white in the space of 3 seconds. He looked at the recorder, at Alina, at my face, and he finally understood. He had been played from the very beginning. "You're bluffing," he stammered, but the conviction was gone. "Am I?" Alina said, standing up. "My anonymous tip to the SEC this morning included your name, your offshore account numbers, and the prediction that you would be attempting to coerce new investors this very afternoon. I believe this recording will serve as lovely confirmation. I think my contact, Agent Miller, will be very interested to hear it." Kyle lunged for the recorder, but Maria, moving with surprising speed, stepped in front of the table. She didn't say a word, she just looked at him. And for the first time, Kyle Preston looked afraid. He backed away, turned, and practically fled from the room. It was over. The aftermath was not a Hollywood ending. It was real life. The SEC, armed with our recording and Alina's evidence, descended on Sterling Gecko like a hurricane. Kyle Preston was arrested. His face was all over the news, a far more satisfying conclusion than we could have ever planned. David was granted immunity in exchange for his full testimony. His career on Wall Street was over, his license permanently revoked. He had to pay a hefty fine and was sentenced to 500 hours of community service. He lost his fancy apartment and his expensive car. He lost everything he thought he wanted, and in doing so, he found himself. He moved back to Florida, not into my house, but into a small apartment nearby. He got a job at a local community center, teaching financial literacy to seniors, helping them avoid the very predators he had once aspired to be. He was quieter now, humbler, and for the first time in a long time, he was happy. Our relationship, once so strained, was slowly healing, rebuilt on a foundation of honesty and forgiveness. And us? The wolf pack of Whisperwind Court. Our short position on Innovix Pharma had made us a small fortune, but we didn't buy yachts or fancy cars. We pooled the money and created a real foundation. The Banyan Tree Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to providing free legal and financial counsel to elderly people targeted by scams. Alina ran the legal side, George built the website and managed the finances, Maria was our head of outreach, and I was the president. I still live in my little house with the hibiscus bushes. The sunshine doesn't feel lonely anymore. It feels like a promise. Life can knock you down. It can throw you into storms you never saw coming. People you love will disappoint you. But that is not the end of the story, because I learned that security isn't a fortress built by someone else. It's something you build inside yourself, brick by brick, with every lesson you learn, every challenge you overcome. I learned that your greatest strength isn't youth or power or money. It's the wisdom you've earned, the courage you find in the darkest moments, and the love of the friends who become your family, your pack. It is never too late to learn a new game. It is never too late to fight back. And it is never, ever too late to become the hero of your own life.